All right, welcome to the companion video on conspiracies and conspiracy thinking. So, gonna quickly go over some background stuff about conspiracies because there's lots of neat stuff there. So I'm gonna try and recap some of that without going on too many tangents, and talk about some philosophical angles on what was in the reading, and just add also just a little bit of psychology to it too, which is important to recognize, which wasn't mentioned in the reading that I picked for this. Okay, so first off, just kind of some background on stuff, because I haven't seen, at the time of this recording, I haven't seen any perusal commentary from this particular class, but when I've used this reading in the past, some of the terminology that gets used in the reading, a little bit confusing, especially for people who aren't familiar with conspiracy theories at all. A little bit hard for me to believe that you people all connected with the internet don't know what Pizzagate is, don't know what QAnon is and stuff like that, but apparently there's some of you, so like kudos for remaining ignorant about those things. That's great, but now you're gonna have to learn about them a little bit. And so usually what we're talking about here when we're talking about conspiracy theories, right, is that we have kind of an idea that there's a plan out there by a secret group of people, right, and somehow they are they're executing this plan while the masses, us, are ignorant of the plan, though we're kind of at least indirectly under the control of these people, and then the plan is going to affect us. That's kind of the simple thing. And then of course the conspiracy theorists, they're outside, they're not part of the plan, they're not in on the secret plan, but somehow they know about it, right? So, and they're trying to do a public service by telling the rest of us, hey, there's this secret plan, and one of the key things you need to do to stop a secret plan is to stop it from being secret, right? Because the more people who know about it, maybe that just blows up the plan right away, but if just revealing it, exposing it doesn't, then letting people become aware of it will get people to actually take active steps to stop a conspiracy from happening, right? So conspiracy theorists are playing, at least they think, they self-perceive as playing that role. But of course, there's more wrinkles to it, right? So you can have in the conspiracy, right, there's different kinds of degrees of participation and knowledge about the conspiracy, right? So you can have the people right at the very top of the pyramid, right? The masterminds. They're the people who both kind of know everything and are the originators of it and the direct controllers of it. But they can have the next layer down, that their henchmen or their minions, right? And those people could be knowledgeable. They could know that they are participating in a conspiracy, even though they're not the ones in charge, right? They're kind of executing the game plan. Or they could be kind of useful idiots or kind of ignorant accomplices, right? Who don't know that a conspiracy is happening, but are kind of instruments to making it happen. And then the rest of us, still the vast majority of everybody out there, right? We're the dupes, right? We're the people who are being victimized by the plan, right? And the conspiracy theorists are usually kind of demographically, socioeconomically in the same class as the folks down here, but definitely not sheeple, because they know what's going on, right? And so the idea here, the characteristics of a conspiracy theory, right, are that you have this secret plan of a small group of people trying to accomplish something without the vast majority of people becoming aware of the existence of the plan or who's behind it or who it benefits, that kind of thing, right? And because these people who are the masterminds are so, controlling and all that kind of thing, they're typically wired into influential institutions and people and or are such people, right? Billionaires and aristocratic, people, generations, royalty, stuff like that, right? And so they tend to be also the people who can influence, maybe through their cutouts, through their minions, right? The official account of whatever it is that we're talking about, the mainstream understanding of a particular series of events, to deflect attention, right? That's part of keeping the secret, is crafting the mainstream account of 9/11 or the school shooting here, there, everywhere, right? The one that I'm currently thinking of is the one that Alex Jones, Infowars guy, denied, thought it was a false flag staged thing that nobody died at, right? The one where the 26 elementary school kids and their teachers died. Alex Jones went on for a long time and got his ass sued, and is still getting sued for having perpetuated that thing, and gotten a whole bunch of people harassing the parents, the survivors of that attack, and accusing them of being actors, crisis actors, and things like that. Terrible. But those people who are in control are also not only in control of the conspiracy, the secret plan, but often are instrumental in helping to craft and maintain the mainstream official account of what happened, the cover-up, right? Because always the cover-up is part of a secret plan, right? You have to have a good cover-up if you're going to distract away from the secret plan. And I think the reading does a good job of really kind of reminding us, look, conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists, right? I'm going to flick back here. Those words have bad connotations, right? I picked the picture of the weirdo in the tinfoil hat on purpose, right? We think that people who believe in conspiracy theories, we react negatively to the term conspiracy theory, right? It has that strong implication, that the attached meaning, right? That it's this wild speculation, that it's not to be trusted, that it doesn't have evidence behind it, and things like that. And the reading tries to kind of reassure us, look, I'm talking about conspiracy theories, and I'm defining them to mean that they are accounts, or that they are accounts of what happened that involve kind of secret plans, and that some of those have actually, like, we can point to conspiracies that have existed, that were actual, right, in the real world. So not all conspiracy theorists, that is, people believe that who in a specific conspiracy or in the possibility of conspiracies happening, they're not all nutcases, because real conspiracies have happened, and real kind of outsiders have learned about them and blown the whistle and those sorts of things. And so, like, we do have the term conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory has accumulated a negative connotation to it, but the author of the reading is saying, look, let's put that to the side. We just want to talk about the concept of a conspiracy theory and the kinds of conspiracy theories that people tend to believe in, and ask, are these so crazy to believe in? Why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Are they characteristically fundamentally different than non-conspiracy theories, than mainstream accounts, official accounts of what happened? Can we draw any kind of general conclusions about these things? And one of the other ways that the term conspiracy theory kind of gets that negative connotation, that lets people just kind of dismiss it as being, oh, that's just conspiracy theory, is not only from the word conspiracy, but from the word theory. Because in ordinary language, when we say something like, oh, that's just a theory, we mean it in a dismissive way, right? We're using the word theory to basically mean the same thing as a guess. And philosophers are going to disagree very much with that, because philosophers think that the word theory means something more than just what we currently, in our current kind of colloquial use of it, use it to mean a speculative story or a guess. It doesn't mean that. A theory, particularly a scientific theory, but theories in general, don't mean wild-ass guesses. They mean a comprehensive account that explains a wide collection of observation. That is, they're kind of like a unifying account, talking about and bringing a big diverse set of observations into one coherent story that covers and accounts and describes all of those things kind of under one roof, right? And so theories can be totally unsupported, wild-ass guesses, right? Or they can be super well supported, like Einstein's theory of general relativity, which is a theory in this meaning of the term. Einstein's theory of general relativity is not Einstein's guess or speculation about relativity. It is a theory in that it's a comprehensive story or account of how natural things behave, and it is supremely well empirically justified, right? We have mountains of evidence that the theory itself is accurate, right? So the word theory, when we say that, you should not think of that as a negative label to put on something, as a reason to dismiss that something, because it's not, right? That being said, like, there are theories, and then there are theories, right? And I just wanted, just as, again, kind of as some background, I wanted to point out this right here, that this diagram I have right here, this is called a Q map. So if you are familiar with conspiracy theories, the Illuminati, right, the Bilderberg group, the Elders of Zion, right, there's lots, unfortunately, so many conspiracy theories about particular ethnic groups, especially the Jewish faith and Jewish ethnicity and stuff like that. But the current popular conspiracy out there is QAnon. And that, if you know anything about it, you might know that Q is an anonymous person who is supposed to have a particular access to American. They're employed in the American government somewhere. They have a very high security clearance, and so they are kind of blowing the whistle on internet message boards about certain activities or certain truths that are, that the government doesn't want you to know, right? But the Q conspiracy theory is much bigger than just this one guy and what he's talking about. In fact, there's this map, and this is not the only map, but it's a nice, and it looks good in tiny really form here, just 'cause it's so colorful and everything like that. So it's a good prop for me. But man, if a theory means a comprehensive account explaining a wide collection of observations, that's a theory. Like, this is huge, right? It explains, it connects, it is a comprehensive account of so many, a wide collection, a huge diversity of world historical events. It's nuts in the sense of how kind of ambitious it is, but also in the sense of kind of how crazy and left field it is, right? Like, literally every significant event in world history has been by this variety of conspiracy theorists connected and is rationalized as being part of a grand overarching conspiracy and plan of a secret group of conspiracists, right? So it's great. This is the conspiracy theory of conspiracy theories out there. But every one of the things on this map is itself a conspiracy theory, right? And so on this map here, so this, I don't know if you can read it, this says JonBenet Ramsey. This is a girl who went missing for a long time and her parents were suspected of killing her, so it was this big mystery and stuff like that. 90s, I think, maybe. This right here says Hillary Clinton and Whitewater. You probably know Hillary Clinton best as being a recent presidential candidate, but way, way back when her husband was running for president, they had some scandal and some controversy over a real estate deal that they were involved in called Whitewater. And so that is seen as a big, there was a conspiracy theory about that they were able to cover this up, that they were hooked into that they had connections that were able to kind of help them elude the law when it came to their law breaking in this real estate deal. The Clintons feature a lot in several locations on this thing right here. But you can also see it's not just about Democrats, because George W. Bush, that's his name right here, and he's closely associated with 9/11 right here and World Trade Center 7, right? So there's all those theories, loose change, 9/11 was an inside job, those kinds of conspiracy theories, right? Each one of those is a separate conspiracy theory where advocates of that conspiracy theory think that the way that things actually went down is significantly different than the official story of what happened on that day or in that episode in human history, right? But the Q conspiracy, QAnon, is kind of unique in that it just kind of gathers up all the other conspiracies and says, yep, I'll take that. That's part of this whole thing. And so it's kind of weird that this has been, eaten up every other conspiracy and put it under one roof. And not all followers of, not all conspiracy theorists who follow the Q conspiracy know all of this stuff. And if you told them all this stuff, they'd say, yeah, I don't know that I believe all that kind of stuff, right? There's a wide diversity of people who say that they're conspiracy theorists, and which conspiracies they kind of think are more accurate than the official accounts. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there just to let you know there's this weird, wild world of conspiracy theories, an account, this whole alternate account of human history that is just filled with conspiracies. Lots of individual ones, or like if you're one of these kind of Q followers, all these different things, these different episodes that have happened as conspiracies, not as the official accounts have them said, that are all kind of unified under one umbrella of this giant conspiracy of a very small group of people to not just control present day America, but the whole world, and they've been in operation for literally centuries. So it's big. It's big. But what we're talking about here is, in this class, is not just going on a huge tangent about what these conspiracy theories are and whether any individual one is worthy of belief, but the more general and abstract question of what is it about a particular conspiracy theory or any conspiracy theory that makes it worth believing in, that makes it credible or plausible or worth your time to think about, and can critical thinking help us sort out truly plausible or credible conspiracy theories from just wacko imaginings of paranoid people, right? Because the reason why we have to ask that question is because that some conspiracy theories are actually the official mainstream account, right? So, for example, Watergate is the name of a conspiracy that happened during Nixon's presidency, where a bunch of Republican operatives, loosely speaking, I don't know how tightly they were tied at the time to the Republican Party, broke into a Democratic office that was housed in the Watergate Hotel. So it got the name Watergate, and that's why every current scandal, because boomers are so uncreative, and so are Gen Xers, everybody's uncreative, has the gate suffix attached to it, right? Gatesgate, Pizzagate, all those, they all have the gate attached to them because these people grew up in a time hearing about the Watergate Hotel break-in, where Republicans broke into a Democratic office to steal polling data and other kinds of inside Democratic information to help them win re-election, right? To help Republicans win re-election. And so that's why everything's got the gate thing. But that was a real conspiracy. And it was a small group of people, including President Nixon and other high-ranking Republican officials, right, who were involved in this break-in and the subsequent cover-up. So that's an actual conspiracy, and we found proof of it at the, well, not right at the time, right, but it got uncovered and revealed, right? And so that's a conspiracy that is the actual story. So not every conspiracy theory is somebody's wild, paranoid flight of fancy, right? Some of them are real. So the point that we want to, the reason why I picked this reading as being something relevant to our course is, unfortunately, because of this particular conspiracy theory being especially relevant in 2021 and probably 2022 and 23 and 24 and up until, you know, the foreseeable future, right? That we have a significant proportion of the American people who think to a certain degree that conspiracies are actively operating to subvert democracy or to do this or to do that evil, untold, un-American thing to people, that we need to, I think, part of my obligation of educating you guys to help you knowledgeably navigate these kinds of things and be able to be your best at distinguishing what's worthy of belief and what's not. And to do that and not be able to, I can't just say you should dismiss all conspiracy theories, because that's not a good rule of thumb, because some conspiracy theories are true. So how do we tell? How do we know the difference? So if theories are not just wild-ass speculation, right? Some theories really are good, like scientific theories generally really good, right? Conspiracy theories, maybe they don't have as good a track record, depending on where you come from, right? But what makes good theories good? How do we test them? If you get presented with somebody who's a believer in a conspiracy theory and they are telling you about it, how do you know whether it deserves any time and energy on your part? How do you know whether it deserves your belief, even your provisional belief? How do you know whether you should tell the person, no, I'm not listening, right? Should you be able to, can we kind of come up with any kind of helpful advice on that score? Well, philosophers, of course, are interested in everything, and they're doing this conceptual analysis on everything, right? And one of the things that philosophers of science, that is philosophers who study how science works and why science works and ask, well, does science really work? They say, look, science has, for certain areas of inquiry, really done a good job at figuring out how to both develop plausible theories, but also, and even more importantly, test them, right? That's the key to science. It's not about the content of the things that they talk about, but about how they talk about them and how they develop the theories that they use to talk about the natural world, right? Science uses experimentation and other kinds of testing to really gauge whether or not a theory, that overarching story, that overarching account of a diversity of phenomena that it gathers up and unifies and gives a unified account of, is that really what's happening? Is that really what properly explains this area of the natural world, right? So science experiments on stuff, which is importantly different than just going out and observing stuff. Experiments are different than observations, right? Experiments are rigorous, systematic. They have control variables and stuff like that. It's not just somebody wandering around nature with a notepad and writing down stuff, right? That science really evaluates its own accuracy and tries to evaluate the ability of that theory, of this claim to have kind of understood something about how the natural world works. Does that actually result in us being able to learn more, ask better questions of nature once we assume the truth of this? That's a good test of theory, right? Another good test of a theory is, does it answer questions and resolve mysteries that it wasn't specifically designed to answer, right? So you could develop a theory because you have a particular group of observations, some things that you have seen, and you're like, I want to make sense of all these, so I'll develop a theory that makes sense of all these things. Well, if you then do succeed in developing a theory that explains those things, then you can't point to the ability of your theory to explain those things as a reason that it's true, because you designed it to do that job, right? So it's not particularly shocking that your theory does a good job at explaining that group of stuff that you designed it to explain. So you can't test your theory by saying, hey, let's see how well it explains this bunch of stuff, because you rigged the game, right? But what you can do is you can note instances where the theory designed to explain this group of things explains this thing over here and that thing over there and this thing over here, right? That it wasn't designed to explain, because those would be happy surprises, right? And if your theory becomes powerful like that, if it allows you to do those kinds of things, or brings things under its umbrella that it wasn't designed originally to bring under its umbrella, that can be an impressive, hey, we're on to something here, right? And you also want to take a look at theories and judge them based on their ability to provide explanations, accounts, descriptions that say, this is why things are this way and not that way, is because my theory says the world operates like this, right? That use established facts and unify those observations. These are all characteristics of good theories. So if we take kind of lessons from science, because science has a pretty good track record on developing theories, on progressing from a pretty good theory to a better theory that's even more accurate, right? It's got a good track record of improvement, right? From theory to theory, and where all of these kinds of things were instrumental in helping to find the next better theory to replace the current theory that was pretty decent but not as good as the new one, right? That we seem to have, science seems to have a pretty good handle on this stuff. So we could use some of these to try and evaluate conspiracy theories and say, how well do conspiracy theories, are they established? Can we do experiments to establish, to gain evidence that those conspiracy theories are true? Do conspiracy theories, are they accurate? Or are they making really vague predictions that really any way the world turns out, people could take the way the world turns out as confirmation that the conspiracy theory is true? Do they help us solve actual problems, right? Do they resolve mysteries and anomalies that they weren't specifically designed to account for? Do they provide explanations that use well-established previous facts? Or do they provide explanations that use facts that they themselves assume are true because they allow them to provide explanations, right? So we can use some of the standards of scientific theories, not all the standards, right? Like, so for instance, it would be unfair in a large part to require conspiracy theories to run experiments like lots of natural sciences do, because natural sciences can bring the part of the natural world that they study into a lab and play around with it and poke it and prod it and cut it up into little pieces and stuff like that. And conspiracy theories are usually about human beings, and it's usually unethical to experiment on human beings, right? The social sciences confront this difficulty as well. So they have a whole kind of, it's some areas of science, it's actually impossible to do kind of traditional experiments on. You have to do what are called quasi-experiments, right? Which is just observations with some extra kinds of controls and strict stuff, and then you have to be more modest about the results of those observations. Because you can't, like if we were going to be social scientists and test, you know, what's the effect of this drug on people's IQ? You're not going to be allowed to, you know, without anybody's knowledge, give half of Americans the drug and half the Americans not the drug, and then just collect data for 50 years and see which group has the better IQ, right? That would be deeply unethical, right? So you can't conduct experimentation like that. You have to be clever and get the same kinds of answers without experimenting on human beings, without them consenting to it. Or you just can't research it that way, and you have to experiment on something that we do think is ethical to experiment on, like rats, which at least some of us think is ethical to experiment on. You might have a different opinion on that. I don't know. But there's obstacles to do. So it's not really a criticism of conspiracy theories who involve human beings to say they don't have experimental data to back them up, right? That their conspiracy theory exists and stuff like that. But other things, other standards here, we could definitely apply to conspiracy theories. But one of the really unique difficulties with applying kind of traditional critical thinking or scientific methods to evaluating whether conspiracy theories are plausible or not is kind of this really characteristic special nature of a conspiracy theory. And that is that conspiracy theories involve secrets. And if they involve secrets, they involve cover-ups, which means that the kinds of things that sciences or other kind of respectable theorizing generally rely on, evidence, is much more difficult to come by for conspiracy theories, right? So usually when we're talking about any other field of study, any other kind of theory, right, if there's no evidence to back up your theory, that's usually taken as a big negative for the truth of that theory, right? If your theory says the world works like this, and therefore we should expect to see this, and then you go out and look for that thing and it's not there, that usually means, people usually take that as a sign that the theory is wrong. But conspiracy theories almost uniformly involve cover-ups and secrecy. And part of cover-ups is the removal of evidence. So for a conspiracy theorist, seeing that they don't expect evidence to be around because they expect that evidence to have been covered up and tidied up. So the usual kind of method of science, which is, okay, tell me your story about how you think the world works, okay, and how would that story, what effects, if the world worked the way that you say it does, how would that show up in what I see around me? Okay, let me go and look for that stuff, and if I find it, that's going to tend to give your theory some credibility and plausibility, and if I don't find it, then that's going to make me doubt your theory. That general approach to determining whether a theory is worthy of belief just doesn't work for conspiracy theories because of this special feature that they have, because of the fact that they're conspiracies, right? Because the mainstream account says is going to look at that absence of evidence, right? And it's going to say, well, I can explain why there's no evidence over there because the mainstream account says the world doesn't work that way, that there isn't that secret group of people trying to do things, right? But the conspiracy account looks at that same lack of evidence and interprets it way differently as being a sign of a cover-up, right? So when you don't see something, they say, aha, I expect you not to see the thing that I said should be there because it's been covered up. It's been removed. It's been cleaned up, right? You've been distracted to look elsewhere, something like that. The problem is that when you have a conspiracy theory in competition for your belief with a mainstream non-conspiracy theory, that the absence of evidence is not what you should look for, right? And when we're used to thinking about non-conspiracy theories, we traditionally look for straight up evidence, right? But when we're looking at conspiracy theories and wondering, is this something that's worthy of me to, entertain as a plausible theory, looking for evidence has to be done in a significantly different way, because the absence of the expected evidence that you might expect on a conspiracy, well, it's just not going to be there because there's a cover-up, right? So that's a difficult part about thinking critically about and evaluating the claims of a conspiracy theory. They're very difficult because some of the usual methods that we would use to evaluate a theory are not available to us in the case of conspiracy theories. The other thing that's really difficult about conspiracy theories is that we have some psychological defects. We depart from rational thinking a lot. Psychology explains this in a variety of ways, but two of the ways that are super important for conspiracy theories are pareidolia and spontaneous organization. So one is our fault and one is nature's fault. So let me explain these two. So pareidolia is the tendency of human beings to over-recognize patterns in nature. So I talked a little bit about this in Kahneman's two systems of thinking, right? Where we're really good because evolution has really honed our ability to see predators, to be alert for predators, so we're really good at seeing them. So good that sometimes we see them when they're not there. We're also really good, and this is a survival trait that's been carved by evolution, to recognize human faces. We're scary good at it. We're so good at it, we see human faces when they're not there. And that's called pareidolia, right? This over-recognition of human faces in nature when they're not really there. And you can just Google that word and then click the images tab of Google search results, and you'll see all sorts of neat tree stumps and potato chips and stuff like that that look like human faces because we see them kind of everywhere. The images that I have right up here are a famous one. So this is an image from a Mars mission, a Mars probe from I want to say the 60s or the 70s, where it took some orbital pictures, and this is a picture that came back. And for a certain section of the not internet, because the internet didn't exist in the 60s or 70s, right? But for a certain section of the public, they were just blown away by this picture and got shared around by people, got shown on TV a little bit and stuff, because that looks like a face. And so there was this idea, wait, maybe there's Martians? They built a monument. This is some Martian person, right? Or maybe Martians don't look like us, but they know that we exist. They know that there's people on Earth, and they know what they look like. They know what we look like. So they built this specially for us, right? So that when we got technology to send probes to Mars, they would take pictures, and we would see that they know about us, and this was kind of their first contact method, right? Was to build this huge monument. It's not like a mountain size, right? But it's several hundred meters across and stuff like that. So this was a dominant kind of thing. But later in the 90s, when we sent much better probes with much better imaging, the resolution on this photo is much better than this one right here. This is the same geological feature on Mars, the same one. And this looks much less like a face, much less like something artificial. And it's just kind of the trick of the light and the fact that actually there's some pixelation in the top picture because of the low resolution and the fuzziness and stuff like that. But we're able to see a face, and it's hard not to see a face in this image. It's easy to not see a face in this more precise and higher resolution image. It's just a mountain with some like slumping or creases or something like that. Isn't it? There's no face here, right? But we see patterns, and we see evidence of intentional design everywhere. And that's what this second thing is, the spontaneous organization. You look at this. This is a really grainy black and white photo of some place in the northern tundra in Alaska or northern Canada, I think, somewhere like that. And the first question that pops in your head is, wow, who piled all these rocks in all these circles, and oh my God, they stretch on forever. This must have taken a lot of effort and time. This must have some significance to the native population that made these things. But they're not. This is a natural thing. No human being did this. No animal did this. As hard as it might seem to believe right now, this is the result of a natural freezing and thawing cycle sorting rocks into these circles. And the paper that I got this from explains the physics of the freeze-thaw cycles and how the freezing water and the freezing ice slowly, iteratively moved rocks into these circular shapes, into these piles, into these ridges and stuff like that. And so it's just a completely natural phenomenon, but it's got so much patterning to it that it's hard for us to believe that it's a purely natural phenomenon. And so kind of both of these things, this tendency to over-recognize patterns and this tendency to attribute patterns to human activity and not to natural activity, are part of our psychological traits that help us survive, that helped us survive in our evolutionary past, but that also predispose us to conspiratorial thinking. Because, now I'm going to flip here to this slide right here, because they tend to make us really susceptible to the kind of thinking that denies that coincidences exist, because we're so good at seeing patterns. So we see some suspicious apparent connection between things, and it's hard for us not to think that there's a real connection that explains that coincidence, right? In psychology, another place that this shows up is called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is when I make a mistake, I tend to blame it on the circumstances. When I don't perform well, the test is too difficult, it was unfair. When other people perform poorly or screw up, that's their fault. It's not the circumstances. That's called the fundamental attribution error, is that we tend to attribute our performance, the causes of our performance, differently when it's us as it is when it's other people. That's another kind of thing that runs in here, but also that pareidolia and over-recognizing patterns. Because one of the things that especially the Q conspiracy, one of their fundamental presuppositions is this claim that there are no coincidences. When you see some strange confluence of events, when you see the number 17 in a place, well, Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. So 17 just isn't, it's not just that, sometimes you're going to see the number 17 just as a matter of course because it's a number like every other number. No, every time you see 17, it's because somebody's leaving a clue, right? To some Q activity or something like that. And so it's those tendencies that we have, which are perfectly explicable and normal for human psychology, but aren't revealing of any deep and hidden truths, right? philosophy has something to say about the lack of coincidences here too, because philosophers understand, right, that there, at least logically, coincidences can exist, right? Two things can happen at the same time without being related to one another, without one of the things causing the other things. That's possible, right? But that there's also times when explaining a link between two things is perfectly reasonable thing to do. And we also have figured out that, look, you can't explain everything, right? Because it's like a 5-year-old asking you why. At some point you have to stop. Maybe just because you're tired answering why questions from an irritating 5-year-old all the time, or maybe because the why questions have reached a point where the thing that you used to explain the other thing itself cannot be explained by anything like more fundamental or more primitive than itself. Philosophers call those things, those inexplicable things where that chain of explanations end, they call them brute facts, right? And the word brute here doesn't mean that they're savage or anything like that. It just means that they are facts that are not dependent on any other fact, right? That's what the brute means in brute fact. And there are things that are properly inexplicable, we call those brute facts, and then there are things that are explicable and that there might be an explanation that we can learn about. They're as yet unexplained things, maybe. So just because something is explicable doesn't mean that we know what the explanation is. So philosophers have these two groups of things. There's inexplicable things and there are explicable things. But if you don't know what the explanation is for something yet, then you don't know whether it is yet to be explained or whether it's really a brute fact and inexplicable, and you should just stop looking, right? And part of this is the question of what needs explanation. We know from psychology, right, that sometimes we have a drive to explain things that is unjustified. It's just a psychological need in us that even when I was talking about inexplicable things and some facts are incapable of being explained because they're like the most fundamental things, that doesn't sit well with everybody. In fact, that sits well with very few people, right? And depending on which things you pick or recognize as being inexplicable, and you say, like everything in the world, so scientists will often say, everything in the world, human behavior, stuff like that, is all reducible, explainable by the motion of atoms and fundamental forces. That, for lots of people, is unsatisfying, right? Because we think that there are things left to be explained, that the motion of atoms can't explain human emotions, can't explain art, can't explain beauty, can't explain this, can't explain that, right? And so it's those, is that a real legitimate demand to be, is that a real legitimate reason to be dissatisfied with that account, with that explanation, with that theory about how the world works? Or is that just a psychological compulsion within us that we're dissatisfied, but you know what, sometimes the truth is unsatisfying, and so you got to live with it, right? It's hard to tell the difference between those two states of affairs. And people who believe in conspiracy theories, or a particular one, or in conspiracy theories in general, have the tendency to be sympathetic to conspiracy theories, tend to think that there are very few things that are inexplicable, including coincidences, and that the vast majority of coincidences are in fact explicable. And because we can't easily find kind of a mainstream non-conspiratorial account of why two things happened at the same time or happened in a certain way, and that's dissatisfying for them, then they're psychologically compelled to provide a conspiratorial account that explains the coincidence as not being a coincidence, right? So that's why the mainstream account will often refer to people making mistakes, but the conspiratorial person will say, yeah, but that's an unsatisfying explanation, right? This is too significant a world event for incompetence or accident or chance to satisfyingly explain the way that things went down, right? I need to see intent. I think that it wasn't incompetence, it was malice, because that makes better sense of the way things happened. Because I think, says the conspiracy theorists tend to be more dissatisfied with coincidences, with brute facts, with other kinds of, hey, that's just the way the world is. There isn't something underlying it, some human activity that explains the way that things happen in that way. Another aspect of a conspiratorial, and you'll see this quote presented a lot by conspiracy theorists: do your research, which sounds like great recommendation, right? And lots of conspiracy theorists will say and advocate for critical thinking. They'll say, I'm trying to think critically, I'm trying to be a responsible knower, they would read Clifford and say, yeah, that's good stuff. You shouldn't believe stuff just because people tell you. You shouldn't believe stuff because it's fun or reassuring to believe stuff. You should be prepared to ask hard questions. And most conspiracy theorists think they are doing that, right? They think they are being good critical thinkers. But those people who are not conspiracy theorists and are pretty unsympathetic with conspiracy theories are worrying that these people, while they say they're doing their research and are being critical thinkers, are actually doing much more of confirmation bias, that they're seeking confirmation for theories because the kinds of research that they do is directed at bolstering, at supporting the conspiracy theory and not kind of objectively assessing the chances that it's true, right? Another aspect of this do your research kind of mantra for conspiracy theorists is that they generally have a suspicion of expertise, that is the mainstream experts, right? So 9/11 truthers, that is skeptics that 9/11 was committed by Arab terrorists, but it was instead an inside job, and that there's a variety of theories, right? But one of them is that George Bush knew and was coordinating the whole thing or participated in the whole thing. Another one is that, there was explosives in the buildings, that there weren't even any planes, that those were added digitally to video and crazy stuff like that. But a lot of the kind of motivation for this stuff is a lack of trust in expertise, a lack of trust in the mainstream media, a lack of trust in institutions, that because all of those things are involved in the overarching conspiracies, things like that. So we read a little bit on this stuff that is relevant, right? We read about Origi on reputation. We read about Dunning-Kruger on ignorance of how on kind of whatever topics you need to be an expert in affects your evaluation of people's expertise, right? But it's kind of weird because while conspiracy theorists talk about doing their own research and kind of reject expertise in general in favor of an individual doing their own research, and in the face of Origi saying, really, you can't do this, there's too much to know, right? They advocate for doing your own research, but when they do that research, they tend to rely a lot on people they view as experts, just not the experts that the mainstream, that the sheeple rely on as experts, right? So people will say, do your own research, and what they'll do, lots of the times, depressingly, is go watch a few YouTube videos and be impressed and call those people that they watched experts and rely on their opinions to shape their beliefs on whether the conspiracy theory is true. So they are, after a fashion, doing their own research, but they're not doing anything fundamentally different in that they're not really rejecting the concept of expertise or relying on experts. They're just choosing different people to call experts and different people to rely on. And so that we could raise questions about, are they doing a good job at picking which experts to rely on? And there's other things that make one suspicious about whether or not a conspiracy theorist, any particular one, and there's a wide variety of conspiracy theorists out there. Some of them are kind of maybe more competent or soberly rational than other ones. But there's one characteristic about the conspiracy mode of thinking, and that is that conspiracy theories are typically these really highly coordinated affairs, right? And so they need and usually have a really highly competent core of conspiracists that are managing the conspiracy theory, right? And depending on how expansive and thorough the conspiracy is, like, those people have to be really competent because they're controlling all of NASA to show you, to manage the fiction that we landed on the moon in 1969, for example, right? Like, that takes a lot of competence to pull off a fake story like that, if you're a conspiracy theorist about the moon landing, right? So they need to be really competent to both succeed at painting, at deceiving people that the mainstream non-conspiracy theory is true, right? And they also need to be super competent in other sorts of ways with operational security and stuff to stay secret, to keep the cover-up functioning so that nobody reveals the conspiracy. But the wider and more complex conspiracy theories are, the more competence they require to manage, right? Like, so if we take the moon landing, right, that does not just involve a conspiracy of the astronauts involved in the mission and some other string pullers in the background, right? That conspiracy involves literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to either be active, knowledgeable participants in the conspiracy or useful idiots, dupes, who have themselves been fooled and are helping to generate and perpetuate the conspiracy, because you effectively need all of NASA, a sizable proportion of Congress people who get confidential briefings and stuff like that to either keep the secret or be stupid enough not to stumble upon the truth when they're in hearings where they hear kind of secret data and stuff like that, plus all the other bureaucrats and stuff in the CIA and the FBI and stuff like that not stumbling upon the truth that NASA, which is filled with scientists, not with spies who are good at covering stuff up, right? They wouldn't know how to cover stuff up if they could, right? So though that tension of conspiracies being super competent, but recognizing that most people are not good, not competent at running huge organizations in secrecy, right? And keeping that secrecy on lockdown. All of that is difficult enough to believe. Plus, the real tension is that lots of the things that conspiracy theorists will cite as their proof that the conspiracy theory is real and that the truth is being covered up, and that the mainstream account is false, is that they'll point to evidence of, clear mistakes that the conspiracy theorists have made. And so the tension is that simultaneous competence that these conspiracists have to run the conspiracy and maintain its secrecy, and the simultaneous kind of incompetence they have to have left mistakes that are obvious enough for like interested amateurs to find, right? So for instance, we're talking about flat Earth, right? There's a lot to cover up here, right? You need to get literally every country in the world in on the scam. So the conspiracists need to be both highly competent and highly powerful, either to bend the will of every world leader and bureaucrats and spies and all those people to keep them in line, or all those people need to be in on the conspiracy theory and then stay secret, right? But at the same time, right, they have to make stupid mistakes like show the flat Earth on the United Nations flag and not think and not be aware, right, that maybe if you were trying to keep the existence of flat Earth kind of a secret from the common person, you probably shouldn't do that, right? That's an unforced error right there. Similarly, right, when you're talking about the Illuminati or some other kind of global conspiracy that stretches back centuries, that usually involves, if not literal demons, right, then, generations of like carefully selected families, right, who pass down the secret conspiracy from generation to generation. But this guy can see through it and knows really what's going on, right? No, that's that's hard to believe that this guy who's wrong about all sorts of stuff and is an idiot and a performer is the guy who is going to uncover this stuff, right? That these people are so in control of human history for centuries, and yet they'll allow, they don't have Lil Nas X on lockdown to shut them. And hey, you're making it too obvious, man. You're giving away the game here. You can't reveal that Satanists are in control of stuff by running this scam with your shoes. They can't control Lil Nas X, but they can control literally all historical events in the world. That's an awkward tension to maintain, right? But conspiracy theorists regularly seem capable of ignoring these things or rationalizing these things so that they kind of make sense. Okay, quick cut there. I lost track of a slide. This was what I was expecting to see on my next slide when I scrolled. So here it is. So in summary, what I've said about all these, hopefully that was a whirlwind and hopefully somewhat coherent tour of conspiracy theories and what kinds of useful things that we might get out of looking at conspiracy theories from a critical thinking perspective. And I think it's kind of indisputable that conspiracy theorists are they're attempting to be responsible thinkers. Often they will kind of explicitly say it, and you can see them trying to be reasonable, to be rational, to really look at things from an impartial perspective. They're trying. I do think, like any area, that there are some people out there who are unscrupulous, who are taking advantage of others, who are grifting, who are spinning tales that are designed to capture the attention, the interest, and the money of other people who are sympathetic of conspiracy theories, and that those people are themselves totally insincere about their activities and asking people to do their own research, and in presenting their research to other people, that they're being insincere with all the stuff, that they don't believe conspiracy theories themselves, but they just perform as a believer because it gets them money. But I think the vast majority of conspiracy theorists are sincere people who value the truth. So, in other words, I think the vast majority of conspiracy theorists are not like trolls or bullshitters. Trolls or bullshitters don't care about the truth. Conspiracy theorists care about the truth. They're just not very good at finding it, right? They don't seem to be aware of some of the characteristic traps of poor thinking, some of the things that feel like good thinking but are not in fact good thinking, some of those psychological tendencies that we have. They don't seem to be aware of those, and the fact that they're pretty vulnerable to those things, and that there are things one can do as an individual, but also as kind of a group of individuals or an institution, like processes or standards or practices that you could put in place to try and minimize or avoid those characteristic traps of irrational thinking. And they're also not very educated and informed about what the ideal of rational thinking is, about how to use evidence, about how to evaluate arguments impartially and systematically, and those sort of things that we're doing in this course, right? They don't seem to have very much education in that. They dominantly go with things that feel right to them, that appear plausible and fit with other things that they know, and that can be really and even when they are good at it, for instance, when they talk about doing their own research, which is definitely something that a critical thinker would advise people to do. Hey, don't rely on other people, do your own research, right? So they have some good ideas, some good things that they have gleaned from critical thinking. The problem with those is even when they're good at some of those things, they're not very consistent at applying those things. And half of critical thinking is being systematic and consistent with the kinds of thinking that you're doing, right? So, for instance, they will challenge the mainstream account in particular ways, which does display a good use of critical thinking, right? They'll challenge the acceptability of particular claims that experts make, right? And point out conflicts of interest or other things like that. Some of the things that I've been teaching you in this course, if you've watched the argument evaluation videos. They are, in certain circumstances, capable of doing those things. The problem is they're going to have a big preference for doing them being critics, being skeptics, only for the claims that they don't want to believe in, and they do not put their own beliefs under similar tests, under similar inquiry, under similar scrutiny. And there's also all sorts of other ways in which certain times they exemplify a critical thinker, they're doing a good job, but then 2 minutes later they're being very credulous, very uncritical about another area. And that's the switch between the two. You can see they're wildly inconsistent at their quality of their critical thinking. But that's a lesson for all of us, right? Is that these people they're not dumb people. There's engineers, doctors, lawyers, all sorts of people who are successful in other areas of life who happen to be conspiracy theorists, who happen to have been taken in by even particularly poor, sloppy conspiracies, because they have certain skills, they're intelligent, they've succeeded in certain areas of their life, but they don't have this kind of general ability to think critically, appropriately, and consistently. And for some reason, that's shown up as a propensity to believe in particular conspiracy theories. So we can take that. I love thinking about this kind of stuff because it's a great way to see how people tend to think and really wildly vary in the quality of their thinking over, seconds. Okay, that concludes my very long video on conspiracy theories. I did not think I would be. I apologize. I thought this was going to be like half an hour tops. Maybe I really just didn't want this one to end because it's the last reading if you've done them in order. And so I just didn't want it to end. But that's not really it. I desperately want this video to end so that I can go to bed. Finish up the reflection activity on this. If this actually is your last reading, this is the 10th reading because you've done them in order, then great. Obviously you can improve the scores on previous readings if they're not late, right? By revisiting, doing a rereading, you get more points for opening up readings for a second, third, fourth time, for posting more comments, that kind of stuff. So that can all be helpful. But you should also move on. You should go look at those other modules. Hopefully you are simultaneously, while watching readings, by doing readings and watching the companion lectures here, you have been working on the argument mapping modules and earning points there. So I'd encourage you to do that. Now that you've finished your readings, go spend all your energy pursuing those other modules and gaining points there.